off topic, but it made me think of something, and I'm curious if you have anything to say about this. You know, so much of these problems seem to originate in the gut, and now they're starting to talk about the stomach as the second brain. Can you talk about that?
Not quite. I can say a little bit about the stomach because ever since Adam was a boy almost, doctors did observe when they looked at sections of the stomach under the microscope, little dark spots that looked exactly like bacteria. They didn't understand the nature of it, and strangely, everybody thought, well, it's either an artefact or it doesn't mean a thing. They ignored it. Now this is another example of something that's extremely obvious, because it was there very, very often, and yet be totally ignored. But one Australian doctor, I think he was from Perth, can't remember his name, persisted in saying that it was an organism. It turned out to be one of the most important organisms ever discovered. It produces a toxin like endotoxin, and it has some dramatic effects on the stomach. It causes ulcers, it causes stomach cancer, and here's the dramatic news: you use an antibiotic to treat and prevent stomach cancer. Dramatic. Of course, this doctor has now achieved world fame, and he deserves it. He should have got the Nobel Prize, actually. That organism can have very strange effects. It's tied up with similar organisms that get into the gums and cause gum disease. And these organisms can exchange genes. I believe they can exchange genes with gut bacteria. The organisms in the stomach can exchange genes with bacteria in the mouth. And it goes beyond what I've just said, because we now know that those mouth bacteria also contribute to the genesis of heart attacks, coronary occlusions. Extraordinary. I do know that taking vitamin C and zinc and so forth doesn't fix the problem. I don't know why, but it doesn't. It's necessary to specifically treat the organisms in the stomach. And by giving a combination of antibiotics and antacids and a few other things, you can get rid of the organism from the stomach. So it's no longer necessary for doctors to do these fancy operations on stomach ulcers and so on. Extraordinary advance.
This brings up a very personal question. Do you have any experience or any knowledge of ulcerative colitis?
Yes. Ulcerative colitis is you may call it a chronic infection of part of the gut. And that is certainly associated with an overproduction of endotoxin. I still don't understand the full nature of it, but there's no question about that. And the endotoxin is continuously absorbed, and if the patient's liver can't detoxify it quickly enough or effectively enough, then it gets loose in the bloodstream. It can also result in liver damage, which can result in liver failure. I had a friend. His wife was my receptionist for quite a while. And he had ulcerative colitis. But you see, the specialist wouldn't agree with me, and I tried to explain to him the danger of the continuous absorption of endotoxin. But he ended up with liver failure. And that is a common complication of ulcerative colitis.
So he chose not to have the surgery.
He had to have a transplant. But you see, they wouldn't listen to me. And after the liver transplant, he developed all the complications in the world, hemorrhages mainly, from everywhere. And I explained how endotoxin causes hemorrhages. The surgeons who did the transplant are obviously extremely talented, but they never consider endotoxin and what you can do with vitamin C. And you should pour intravenous vitamin C into these patients until you get them sort of stabilised. I can't really cure ulcerative colitis, but I can stop the worst of the complications that occur with it. There's no doubt about it.
Have you treated anyone with vitamin C who had ulcerative colitis?
Yes, it's very, very beneficial. But my friend who had the one liver transplant ended up having two. And he went through the same problems all over again. And this brings another issue out. In the case of Alanuco, he was charged with shaking his baby to death, jailed for 7 years, till he was released a few weeks ago. His baby's organs were donated, and that included the liver. And the heart. I tried desperately to get information about what happened to the recipients of those organs. Apparently the recipient of the heart is alive and well. But they won't give information about the recipient of the liver. See, if the donor dies from an illness that includes excessive amounts of endotoxin, and that's what happened to Alan's baby, and you use that liver to transplant it into somebody else, there's an increased chance that that liver's going to fail. So I've been trying to persuade them to infuse it with vitamin C before and after transplant. A safe thing. Now, why are you going to do any harm? I mean, you have to be sensible, of course. You use it in the right concentration, in the right way, and so on. You won't do it. Now, a lot of these transplants can be prevented by vitamin C and other antioxidants, since we got onto this subject. In the early 1980s, I read in a journal somewhere or other that in China there's an area where cardiomyopathy, that is damage to the heart muscle, was very common. And they found that it was due to two things in combination: selenium deficiency plus a vitamin E deficiency. Apparently you need to have the two together. And in the worst cases of cardiomyopathy, you either have to leave them to die or you have to do a heart transplant. So shortly afterwards I saw a man, he was in his early 30s, who had cardiomyopathy very severely. He'd been down to Sydney and had been placed on a waiting list for a heart transplant. He was extremely ill. But they couldn't find a matching donor. So I started him straight away on selenium, vitamin C, zinc, and so on. He gradually started to improve, then the improvement accelerated, and he got to a stage where he virtually had normal heart function, no longer needed to have a transplant. He had a very good wife, he did all the proper things, he stopped smoking, his wife made sure he ate the right sort of food. He ended up normal. But some years later he dropped dead. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I saw a second patient, an old man, who came to see me one day, and I knew him well. And he'd suddenly developed cardiac failure, bang, like that overnight. I was able to get a chest x-ray done. I had at least that facility where I was working. He had a heart the size of an elephant's almost. Cardiomyopathy. I rang the specialist in Sydney, who is a great friend of mine, and made an urgent appointment for him to be seen the next week. In the meantime, I started him on all the antioxidants, the zinc, the vitamin C, the vitamin E, the fish oil, and selenium, and so on. By the time he got to see a specialist the next week, his heart was normal size. Dramatic. And I had a series of patients like that. They no longer needed to have heart transplants. Now this is you'd think the specialists, including my friend, this specialist in Sydney, was Sydney's leading cardiologist at the time. I went through university with him. He was Greek the same as I was, or am. We socialised together. He wouldn't have a bar of it. Now, the important issue, however, is this, that old man, a few years later, just dropped dead too. And I suspect, and I can only be suspicious, because I don't really know, but it should be investigated. I suspect that the cardiomyopathy, of course, we know it damages the heart muscle. And there are special heart muscle fibres that conduct the electrical impulse around the heart that is responsible for the normal beating of the heart. And I suspect that some of those fibres are very susceptible to injury. And they must, for want of a better expression, scar over a period of time and suddenly block the impulses. So they drop dead. The heart just stops. Now this may not be so, but it has to be so really. Or let me put it another way, until somebody looks at it and provides me with information to the contrary, I have to assume that that is what's causing the sudden deaths. So okay, I can perform a miracle by preventing the need for heart transplant, but it seems to me that after a period of time these patients should all have pacemakers fitted. So the heart stops beating, the pacemaker would start beating again. Now I may be a bit wrong, I may be very wrong, but it bothers me that they won't even look at it.
No autopsies done on either of these two men?
Yes, they found nothing. They just said it was a heart attack.
So they didn't really look at those fibers
No,
necessarily?
they won't. People wonder why I get angry, or perhaps bitter. Mind you, that first patient survived for many years. But that's another example of the frustration that I continuously face.
Sandy?
Talk about the response of the public to your work and how in some ways that has influenced
When I first started this work, the public response was extremely favourable and almost violent. It resulted in the Australian government being forced, literally forced, to investigate the issues. Particularly about vitamin deficiencies in Aborigines. So they rang me up from Canberra and said, "We're going to do a survey, Dr. Kalokerinis, on the vitamin levels. What are you going to say when we prove that you are wrong?" I said, "No way you'll prove I'm wrong. If you prove I'm wrong, I'll tell you haven't done the job properly and go and do it again." They said, "That's not very scientific, is it?" And I said, "Yes, it is, because I knew." So they got one of their leading doctors. Dr. Eben Hipsley turned out to be a magnificent man, to head the survey. And they came up to Collarenebri and the neighbouring town of Walgett. It was a very thorough survey indeed. It was financed largely too by Roche, the big drug company, because they had in Sydney they had the only specialist who was capable of estimating the various vitamin levels in blood and tissues. Unfortunately for me, one of their chief medical officers, that is at Roche, was a great friend of mine. So they started the survey in Collarenebri and Walgett. They not only examined blood samples from whites and Aborigines, they examined urine samples, they examined the foods, they examined all sorts of tissues and so on. They used to follow school kids on their way to school and see what food they bought, and they analysed the foods. Well, after a few weeks of working in Collarenebri and Walgett, the initial results came back, and they were far worse than anything that I even suspected. There are gross deficiencies right across the board amongst Aborigines, in not just vitamin C, but all the vitamins really. And there's a substantial number of deficiencies amongst the elite whites as well. There's one thing that really interested me. The vitamin A levels are also extremely low, some are almost zero. And some years before, I did a little bit of work in the Philippines where there's a condition caused by vitamin A deficiency which causes almost total destruction of the eyeball. They call it xerophthalmia, and it's very rapid in onset and it's total and they're blind. And vitamin A supplements will prevent it. But when I looked at the statistics and the figures, the levels amongst the Aborigines were just the same as the levels amongst the Filipino children. Yet the Filipino children were getting xerophthalmia. Australian Aborigines were not. There had to be an explanation. I talked to the authorities. They all acted as if I should be carted off to the nut house. But I did read somewhere in the journal, I'm going back quite a few years, there's not just a vitamin A deficiency that causes xerophthalmia, there's some trigger. I think this came from India. Unless that trigger is also present, vitamin A deficiency alone by itself will not cause xerophthalmia, but vitamin A supplements will prevent it. A bit complicated. No one's interested in it. Now, the research team was supposed to go on from Collarenebri and Walgett to Alice Springs. And I knew, and by then they knew, that the results in Alice Springs would be a great deal worse than the results in Collarenebri and Walgett, which were bad enough in themselves. So rather than admit under pressure that vitamin deficiencies existed and were serious, they delayed the arrival of the research team in Alice Springs for 3 months and supplemented all the infants around Alice Springs with vitamins. And they didn't just give the bottle of vitamin drops to the mothers, they went round every day and physically put the spoon in the kids' mouths. You probably won't believe this. And at the end of 3 months they invited the research team to come and do the survey. Of course they were faced with supplemented infants. But the authorities hadn't supplemented the adults, so the deficiencies were found there. Now, if you can explain why the authorities acted like that, let me know. And it's still something that really hurts. Because today, so many years after, that was in the, it had to be in the early 70s, you go to these various Aboriginal medical services and so forth right across Australia. They're not supplementing infants. They're not using the knowledge that we gained years ago. I mean, this is crazy.
What's the level of health amongst Aboriginal children today, in 2004?
There has been improvements, but a lot of things are no better. The infant death rate is not quite as bad as it used to be, but it's still far, far higher than it is amongst Caucasians. The incidence of otitis media is probably just as bad or worse. The incidence of trachoma is just as bad or worse. The incidence of diabetes amongst adults has just shot up sky high, of course, as more and more adults are growing up on bad food. Cataracts, kidney failure, requiring dialysis. Now that's interesting and important. There are several reasons for the increased incidence of kidney failure amongst adults. And obviously diabetes heads the list, but it's not just diabetes. Years ago there was a very athletic, slim, fit Aborigine by the name of Charlie Perkins. He was a first grade footballer. He never was fat. He was always relatively lean and fit. At a very young age he developed severe kidney failure and had to have a transplant, which was successful. So it was apparent to me that the reason why so many Aborigines were developing kidney failure was not just because of diabetes. Charlie didn't have diabetes. There was something else. All right, he was just one man. But to me it was highly significant because he stood out like a shag on a rock. No diabetes, he wasn't overweight, he wasn't eating junk food, still had diabetes. And the guy upstairs one day pointed out an article, I think I found it on the internet actually, but I think it must have been with his help. Endotoxin can produce certain effects at a certain age. And apparently, for reasons that I don't understand, a particular individual may go through many years of apparent good health and suddenly, bang, the kidneys will fail. Now, I don't understand it. It should be investigated intensely. Now, they have all sorts of complicated tests they can do on tissues, immune factors, and all sorts of complicated blood tests. Should be doing it. All right? Just one case, but it's highly significant. And there's so many Aborigines now with kidney failure on dialysis that it's not funny. Now, once again, here's another example. An important observation, the importance of which is not recognised. And I'm left standing here wondering what in the hell is wrong with everybody. Why don't they investigate? As they should. Now, it may find an explanation for many cases of renal failure requiring dialysis. They may not. I think they will.
So I know you have more. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to follow up on that. You, on this public response.
Let me stop. Put it on.
All right. Am I close enough to the lens, or are you getting a good eye
You're
line?
doing fine.
Great.
Okay, camera's rolling and anytime, sir.
Tell us about the public's response to your work.
Initially, the public response to my work was remarkable. Enormous support right across Australia. And it was only because of public insistence that initially I got some sort of cooperation. But as time went by, I lost that support. When I say I lost it, I think people more or less just sort of wandered away from it. And it makes life now for me much, much harder, because the newspapers, for example, will not even publish a letter that I write. I can't get any television coverage. Life is much, much more difficult. There's a lot of people who still remember me, of course, and that helps, but that huge public support that I once had is no longer there.
Do you think that, quite what I want to say here.
Now, if you don't have questions, I do.
Well, I have one more too.
All right, go ahead, guys.
Okay, I just wanted you to talk about the This Is Your Life show.
That was, This Is Your Life, or being on This Is Your Life, was quite an experience. Apparently, the person involved must never know that it's going to be on. In fact, if they discover beforehand that it's going to be, then it will never be. They'll stop it. So Catherine had to withhold all this from me. And she used to go to a couple of things that I wouldn't go to. She apparently deliberately arranged one evening that she would do that, but she would actually be going to the television station. And when she came back, just a sort of a joke, I said to her, I suppose they talked about vitamin C. And she smelt a rat. She thought I knew, but I was just joking. And then I said to her, did they talk about me? And I was just joking, really. But it was exciting, very exciting, and I was particularly gratified because my mother was getting old and fragile, and it was a great boost to her. Now, the system that was used then was to record the program, and it would go over and be broadcasted a week or two later. But the Australian Medical Association got to hear about it, and they applied pressure to the television station not to show the program. But the producer of the program said to them, "Okay, you are contracted with me for half an hour of viewing time. If you don't allow me to show this program, I will show half an hour of nothing." And they were forced to show it. But it was very nice. They brought the Aboriginal twins, they were about that high down. A lot of my friends. And it's an experience that even my opal mining friends were there. It's an experience that I won't forget in a hurry. It was nice.
Did they bring you on 2 weeks later when they show it, or did you just see it on TV?
No, I saw it at home, yes. But it shows a bastardry of some of my colleagues to try to stop the program. I'm sorry to say that the producer died a couple of years ago. He was very highly decorated in the Second World War. He did a lot for Australia. And we read about his funeral by chance in the paper. So I went down for his funeral. I was sitting in the church in Sydney waiting for the service to start, and I was the only one sitting in the church. And a lady came in to clean something or other. And I said to her, "Where are all the people?" They had this man's medals spread out for everyone to view. I couldn't understand it. I said, "Where is the band? They should have had a military band outside and crowds of people." There was nobody. And just a few minutes before the service was due to start, a handful of the family came in. I was upset. I still am upset. I thought, what has a man got to do to achieve some recognition when he dies? That hurt. Because you're such a wonderful man, he stood up for me.
I think that's all that I have at this point.
Bill?
Okay. And I want you to kind of make your questions brief, because what we're going to do here is kind of rephrase the same question over and over again, basically.
Maybe your
Because I,
answer.
as a filmmaker, know of all the problems I get into in editing. It seems like, when I watch TV, there are hundreds and hundreds of various pills advertised that do rather trivial things to better my health. And all these pills are always saying, well, but don't take it if you've got this, this, or this, or it can cause this, this, or this. I mean, there's just a whole litany of dangers that they list when they try to sell me these pills. And yet, vitamin C is a very safe substance. So it would seem like if there are hundreds and hundreds of pills that we take every day for various minor things that are in fact, have known side effects that are dangerous, that to not take vitamin C to save your life seems ridiculous. Can you tell me that?
It is ridiculous, but unfortunately, some years back, there are some reports about so-called adverse side effects of taking large doses of vitamin C. There's no truth in these whatsoever. They were saying that vitamin C could, in big doses, cause kidney stones. And this was because when we consume vitamin C, some of it is converted into oxalate, and excreted in the urine, and it is known that some kidney stones consist of oxalate. So one particular professor, I think he was a professor, wrote an article that was published in a leading medical journal where he discussed the theoretical possibility of vitamin C, when taken in large doses, causing kidney stones. Later he wrote another paper that was published, and he referred back to his first paper as if he was talking about the actual formation of kidney stones, not just a theoretical discussion. And that second paper was widely publicised and quoted and requoted and requoted by authorities all over the world who said, don't take a lot of vitamin C, you'll get kidney stones. There's no truth in it. There's virtually no side effect from taking large doses of vitamin C, except if you take a lot by mouth, it will act like Epsom salts and you get diarrhea. That's about the only side effect. I have given 240 grams, not 240 milligrams, 240 grams of sodium ascorbate intravenously to patients 5 days a week for weeks on end, and all the blood tests came back perfectly normal. The blood sodium levels were normal. You don't have to worry about the sodium in it. It is handled in the body in a different way to the sodium in salt. There's no danger in it. The only problems are you must get it into the vein, not into the tissues. And just use common sense. It's about the safest thing you can do. It is safer to give an intravenous injection of vitamin C than it is to give an intravenous injection of normal saline, because no matter how careful a doctor may be with sterility, occasionally at the injection site an infection will develop that can result in death. But with vitamin C, it is really self-sterilising, and the chances of an infection occurring at the injection site is a great deal less. So it is really absolutely safe.
So do you know that there are other drugs that people take all the time, that, you know, pills and injections that are at least theoretically more dangerous than vitamin C? How many drugs do you think we take?
Almost everything. Almost every other type of medication can cause in different individuals either minor problems, moderate problems, or terrible serious problems. And this is a mistake that a lot of doctors make. They think that every human being is the same and the response to a particular drug at a particular dose is going to be the same in every individual. Well, it isn't. And they need to watch the patient very carefully and listen to what the patients are saying to be sure that they don't get a serious adverse side effect. And we know it from statistics anyway that many hospital admissions and many deaths in hospitals are really due to an adverse side effect of a commonly prescribed drug.